It's really great to be here. Well, I'm really thrilled. So thank you very much. Today I'm going to be giving one of my more moderate speeches. One of my more moderate speeches, is government necessary? So what would happen if we didn't have government? What are some examples that come to mind if we didn't have government? Things like Lord of the Flies. They didn't have government. These children went to the island and there was chaos. They did a lot of very mean things to each other. What are some other things that come to mind if we didn't have government? Mad Max. Anybody saw the movie Beyond Thunderdome? It's a post-apocalyptic world. And just to go down the street, there's people with motorcycles throwing things at you, trying to steal your gasoline. Very, very scary situation. What are some other things that come to mind if we didn't have government? The Wild West. All these criminals going around, gunslingers, fighting over cards, getting in bar fights. That's what we'll have without government. Or, this is from West Virginia example, the Hatfields and the McCoys, for anybody who's heard the story. These two families got in a fight, and next moment there was a feud between them, and then it just went on and on and on for years, each party trying to get back at each other. This is what we would have without government. Or anarchy. Anarchists with bombs, lighting things on fire. All of these mean, scary things. The basic classical liberal view is, by John Locke and others, says that we need government because in a state of nature, there lacks an indifferent judge who's going to be able to settle disputes objectively. He says, in a state of nature, everyone being both judge and executioner of the law, with men being partial to themselves, passion and revenge is apt to take them too far. Okay? So the issue is, chaos is bad. The proposed solution? A government monopoly over the use of force. So, that's why we have the police. The police come in to help us. Friendly police on horses come in to help us. They can talk with our children, get kittens out of trees. We've got the court system, blind and impartial justice. They just care about the truth and not weighing on anybody's side. We've got our very nice jurists. What a nice group of people we have helping us. We've got the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines with great values like loyalty. Here are some Army values. Their truth, true faith and allegiance to the Constitution, your Army, your units, and other soldiers. Service. Put the welfare of the nation and the Army and your subordinates before your own. Respect. Treat people as they should be treated. Honor. Live up to all of the Army values. Integrity. Do what's right. Legally and morally. So all these great things, and we add those together, and then they can respect our way of life. Everything that is great and near and dear to our society and to civil society, the government can protect. Okay? I'm done, thank you. Alright, so from the viewpoint of economics, I want to say, alright, that's the view that they present, but is that the complete picture? Okay? Is this the only thing that happens? What are some things that they often don't present? Some of the things that they don't talk about as much. Okay? We've got sometimes government. This is Elian Gonzalez, if anyone followed that case, but sometimes government uses guns against people, against little children oftentimes. Sometimes we've got even more scary people. I don't know about you guys, but this is Janet Reno. At least for me, I have nightmares about Janet Reno. Whenever I see this woman, like, look at her body language. Like, does she look like a nice woman? Like, ah! Okay, Waco, Texas. Unfortunately, many people were killed, possibly due to her orders. Other things, police brutality. Government oftentimes is not the nicest to people. Sometimes they shoot people. Sometimes they kill people. Okay, this is Kent State, famous nonviolent protesters in the 1960s or 70s. Sometimes they bring in many other things that are much worse. Okay, tanks, war, killing people, killing thousands and thousands of people who are not necessarily involved with the conflict. So, my position that I want to advocate is that just because something is important, the question I want to ask is, does it follow that government should provide that service? So, before I get to the law enforcement example, I want to talk about some other examples. Suppose I were to make the following argument. Food is important. So therefore, what we should have is government should monopolize the food industry. Okay? Because people make the same argument about law. Law is important, so therefore we should have a monopoly over the use of law. Should we have a monopoly over the use of food? Most people would say no. Okay? What do we have when government monopolizes food? Things like food lines or food shortages. Okay, you go to the store. I guess this is the part of the world. I don't know if anyone experienced this. Someone told me that in Russia, I think you told me this, that the reason why there was such long bread lines is because the bread was so good. Okay, most people are not satisfied with having government monopolize food, because in many cases it does lead to massive starvations. Most people say that private food industry competition, it's better to have private production of food, and we see a lot more food than we did under government monopolization. Let me ask another question. Automobiles are important. Transportation is important. Does it follow that government should monopolize the automobile industry? This is what we get. Okay, I apologize if anybody owned any of these cars. But these are not necessarily the best cars in the world. There was a survey of the worst car of all time. And this one won, the Yugo, the worst car of all time. Most people say the government should not monopolize the auto industry. We're much better off having privately produced cars from wherever we have them. Not just from one company, not just from one country, from anybody around the world. Okay, so my argument is that most arguments for government are non sequiturs. Okay, the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. Just because something is so important doesn't mean the government should provide it. So, my question is, if markets are so good at providing everything else, what about law? Right? Okay, the classic argument against this is one of the classic arguments is by Ayn Rand. And she says, yeah, markets can do these other things, but they can't do law for the following reasons. And I'll just read her scenario really quickly. To point it out, and this is basically our argument for government and against anarchy. She says, suppose Mr. Smith, a customer of government A, suspects his next door neighbor, Mr. Jones, a customer of government B, is robbed. A squad of police A proceeds to Mr. Jones' house and is met at the door by a squad of police B, who declare they do not accept the validity of Mr. Smith's complaint, do not recognize the authority of government A. What happens then? You take it from there. Okay, so this is the argument. We can't have multiple sources of law. We can't have private law enforcement. Well, I want to... So here it is. We've got police of government A. They come along. Police of government B say, no! And now what? People get in a fight. I don't know what happens. All right. I want to ask how this problem could be solved privately. And to do this, I don't want to even hypothesize about how this might be solved in the future in some science fiction point of view, but just point out that this type of solution does take place, this type of problem does take place, and there already are many current-day solutions. And I'm going to offer a few of them. The first one I want to mention is, what happens if two college students at a private university get in a dispute? College student A gets in a dispute with college student B, and they say, "You're playing your stereo too loud," or "You spilled your beer on me." What do? Do they call up George Bush and say, "Solve our problem"? No, what happens in a college is, a private college, they have very complicated legal sets of arrangements that police the campus. So we've got private security on campuses. They monitor the campuses. They control the campuses. There's also a whole judicial system within private colleges. We have, in the college that I went to, would have resident advisors, who are just basically students who live on your floor. They're a couple years older, but they're students. And if there's a dispute, they're the first ones to solve it. If they can't handle the dispute, it then goes to the complex director, who would be an older person living on the campus. If he can't solve the dispute, he says, okay, let's have it decided by the associate dean, or the dean of students, who's basically like the Supreme Court on campus. So there's rules, but they're private rules. Once I went to a Jesuit college, and once I got in trouble, and I had to go see this guy, and I'll tell you, I was never so scared in my life, but he solved the problem very quickly. Like, okay, all right, whatever you do, please. Don't send me to hell. All right, so we've got private judges. They don't have the same appearance as government judges, but nevertheless, they're providing many of the same services that judges allegedly provide. The judges in the United States wear these big robes, and they've got paintings of them everywhere. But these people on campuses are doing many of the same things. Okay, so we've got a very elaborate system equivalent to a judicial system, but it's informal. All right, and my college that I went to was very nice. A great situation, very peaceful, very little reliance on government. All right, so we've got colleges are one common example. Other examples where we have private security, Disneyland. Okay, Disneyland, there's more private police in Disneyland than the city of Anaheim. Pretty amazing. And what do the cops do? They go around beating people up. Give me your money! What would happen if the Disney cops would do things like that? Right? They would lose money. So instead we've got very friendly, happy Disney security officers. Okay? It's a profit-motivated corporation, and their incentive is to please the customer. Other examples of privately produced law enforcement at a local level. Shopping malls. Okay? Some shopping malls are very big, and they've got a very elaborate system of security to prevent customers from stealing, to prevent customers from being mean to other customers. All of these things, the shopping mall has to create a system of order. Otherwise, no one's going to want to do business there, right? The shopping mall will lose money from the tenants and potential customers. Other examples of private security, Las Vegas. I'm sure it works the same here, but the casino can have a lot of money stolen from them, right? Not just from their customers, but from their dealers. They don't rely on government. Call up the government, someone might be stealing. Okay, they can't do that. So instead, they have all of these monitors overhead. I'm sure everybody has seen these things. They even transmit them between casinos. If someone is a suspected card counter, they'll take pictures of that person. What's that? Yeah, right. And they'll send it to, I haven't seen the movie, but I read part of the book. They'll send it to the other casinos. Right. And so it's a very elaborate system as well. Okay, so here's just a few examples at a local level. People might say, well, all right, this is within the framework of a government system of law. That's the only reason it works. How could it be the case if you had people operating across borders? And Thomas Hobbes gives the classic argument about how if you don't have one monopoly law enforcer, you're going to have conflict between two groups. So Thomas Hobbes basically says you need one ultimate authority to lay down the law. And I want to point out that at an international level, these types of problems exist all the time. There's not one monopoly overarching law enforcer, and nevertheless, there's not chaos. So let me rephrase Ayn Rand's question. What if Mr. Jones had a dispute with Mr. Smith? Mr. Jones, I'm going to call my police to get my police on you. Mr. Smith, but I don't recognize the authority of your police. And Rand says, what happens there? Chaos. Well, what happens in this case? Well, we've got a private judge coming in to save the day. He's privately contracted. He's not from France or Italy. He's from wherever he is, from the league. Both parties select him ahead of time to enforce the rules. Okay, so you can have disputes between different people as long as they agree to follow a private arbitrator. Okay, a private judge is very common. Let me ask you this. What happens when there's international shipping? Two companies have a dispute between borders. Okay, one company from America, another company from Asia. What happens when there's a dispute? When they have a dispute, no party, no one government has jurisdiction. You can't just call up, I can't call up the government of Singapore and say, hey, that guy took my money. Can you send him to your jail and get your money back for me? That's not how it works. One option is you could call someone on the phone and yell at them. I hate you. Give me my money back. I hate you. That's one thing you could do. Or you could say, let's arm wrestle. That'll be the best way to solve it. Okay? Instead, what happens with international disputes? We've got incentives for both parties to find ways to minimize the costs of these disputes. And specifically, most parties will sign things that include arbitration agreements. So in the contract, it says, in the case of a dispute, we will agree to have our case heard in this particular tribunal. Arbitration is in many ways like a government court, except for it's much more informal. Here we've got different pictures of mediation. They're building bridges. Mediation, people say, let's not fight. Let's be nice to each other. Because if they can find ways of solving this dispute cost in a less costly manner, both parties will gain. Okay? So when there's a lot of money at stake, parties will figure out ways to eliminate the cost of disputes. Okay, so we've got arbitration mechanisms. In addition to arbitration, there's other things, such as bonding. You can say, I'm only going to deal with a party that is bonded, or you could say, I'm only going to deal with a company that we've got an escrow account. Both parties deposited a certain amount of money with the escrow account. If someone cheats, the escrow account says, all right, we're going to give the money to this party. In addition to that, there's all these other mechanisms, reputation mechanisms. People oftentimes will not have an enforceable contract, but they will know the person really well, and because if you know someone really well, then you can trust them. So there's all these things that people do independently of using the law. All right. So those are the major ones. We've got in the United States securities industry, National Association of Securities Dealers has a very elaborate system of dealing with disputes. We have this whole process where you submit a claim, they choose an arbitrator, there's a hearing, and at the end of the day, they decide who has to pay. In every contract, a securities contract, you have to have basically an arbitration agreement. Other examples in the United States, which are more reputation-based, that's around the world as well, based in near where I live, but eBay. This happened to me. I wanted to buy these Mary-Kate and Ashley buttons from eBay, and for $2.60, and the person didn't send them to me, and I was crushed. So I called up my local senator, and I said, "Can you get me that money? Can you give me my buttons?" And my local senator, no, none of this happened. How does it work on eBay? How do you know that you're going to get your goods? Okay, there you go, reputation. So this person is 99% reliable. I know I'm going to get my Mary-Kate and Ashley buttons, and they're great. All right, so I want to just point out that this is very common at the local level. It's very common across borders too. And how far can we push this? Some people might say, okay, maybe it works only to a certain extent. Could this happen at a societal-wide level? I don't know. It's too difficult. Wouldn't there be too many transaction costs if you had to sign an arbitration agreement everywhere you went? Every time you went into a new college, you had to sign an arbitration agreement. How would you know what the college's rules are? People make this argument that government is created to lower transaction costs. This would be a Doug North type of argument. And I want to say the situation, by the way, these arguments are very similar to the nationalized healthcare arguments. Government's going to lower transaction costs. But I want to say that there's lots of problems that potentially have high transaction costs that are already solved today. And one of them that's very illustrative is credit cards. I could come thousands of miles all the way on the other end of the globe, give somebody a piece of plastic. I can give someone a piece of plastic. I can put a piece of plastic in this wall, and then out, not this one, but I put it in this wall, and this money came out. I have no idea. How does this work? How can I just go into a store and give him this piece of plastic, and he's going to get his money? Well, the way it works is the network, a private network, vouches for me and says, okay, you have your bank, he has his bank, and they're very disparate, but they're connected together all around the world, and the transaction costs on credit card transactions are nothing. 1%, 3%. It's very, very minimal. They have a very elaborate system of resolving potential disputes, of settling accounts. If people within the Visa network, if they have a dispute, they're not even allowed to attend their own trial. They've determined that it's not cost effective. But people want to be a part of it. Okay, so credit cards, I think, are just one example of how you can have people from all different parts of the world interacting. You can have your own bank. Your bank can have its own rules. But as long as we can have a common set of rules, we've got our MasterCard rules, our Visa rules, we can agree on things. All right, so to me, money and the profit motive actually is a better way of minimizing problems. When there's a potential problem of fraud, of violence, this is bad. But what's the flip side of a potential problem is a potential profit opportunity. And when there's money involved, you can actually profit by figuring out ways of resolving disputes. Government doesn't have those incentives. Okay, so to conclude, is private law enforcement impossible? No, it's very common, actually. If we look at the incentives of the different parties and the knowledge, the information, private parties have to ultimately appeal to their customer. Government doesn't have to do that. And finally, market relationships are voluntary, which I think is very important. We should focus on that. All right. So, to conclude, just because security is important does not mean it should be provided by the government. Markets work well in every other area. Why not consider them for the resolution and adjudication of disputes? And just to leave you with some future potential readings, Roderick Long, I recommend. He's got a great opinion on everything, and he says the following. He says, this nearly 700-page book is quite simply the definitive collection on free market anarchism. This here and now is it. Oh, what was that? Anarchy in the Law by Stringham.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm sure you have questions. We have a couple of minutes to field questions. I've seen Stefan, and Stefan, go ahead. I've seen Marilu and Nick, and we'll see you.
Obviously, I completely agree with everything you said.
Genius.
One thing I usually try to immediately introduce people to is the idea that, well, define government, basically the idea that there's absolutely nothing that defines government in any way. It's normal people from normal society, and they have absolutely no qualifying properties that will somehow set them apart from anyone else in society. That's just a little addition.
Good. Yeah, I agree with that. The only thing I would add is Rothbard says it's the entity that arrogates a monopoly over the use of force. So taking it without voluntarily getting it.
There was Marilu, and then Nick, and we'll see whether we have time for another question.
Mostly stimulated suggestions, not questions. But community organizations, standards associations, membership associations develop credibility for their members, and they monitor their members. And even with the law so-called protecting us, insurance companies will give preferred rates to those who are members of those associations. So I think the insurance industry is a good substitute for government.
Great, good comment. I think a lot of people, including libertarians, often focus too much on the use of force, even the private use of force, where there's all these non-coercive use of incentives to say, hey, you know, if you don't pay back your loan, that's fine, but you're going to get a bad credit rating for the rest of your life. And so people say, I'm going to pay back. I don't know how to pay back. So that's a great example.
Nick? I mean, either you use it as a trumpet or you use it as an ice cream cone.
I mean, just a quick question. How on earth would you sort of arbitrate a murder case?
Well, historically, in colleges, for example, they used to have people would be matriculated citizens of that college, and when you step foot on the college of Oxford or Cambridge, they actually had their own legal system, their own authority. So it's, you know, in some sense arbitration, but I'm advocating taking the criminal legal system and giving that to the private legal system. I'd much rather have, I mean, take the recent example of, I don't know if anybody followed this, the Duke lacrosse case in the United States, a huge travesty of injustice. And I'm not saying the college was great, but who would have done a better job at adjudicating that dispute? The government? Or suppose this was held by Duke. If they were the landlord and they were a profit-motivated entity, I would say I'd much rather have the dispute adjudicated by Duke.
And especially we have private prisons now, so you can send a...
Yeah, that's a tough question.
The last question, Jacques. Yes.
We are so far from a state without a government that I am asking you the question, what should be the next step?
first step, and it begins in this room, is for us to get together, to start smashing the state. I believe that there's pockets of liberty at all times, but there's also this constant battle. And I think Thomas Jefferson said it well when he said the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. I think that ultimately in the long run, ideas will overwin any amount of force. And since I think that we have the right ideas on our side, it's just a matter of us convincing enough people. So, thank you very much.
And by the way, this is an exercise in self-promotion.